When I found out that, well, when I was asked to do the film, it was terrific, and when I found out that Rami Malek was going to be playing Freddie, he was the only cast member we had at that time, so I was able to concentrate just on him to begin with. But it was, I mean, what was great is, you know, because he's Egyptian descent, so he had, you know, fantastic colouring, and I knew all that was going to work, and he had a, you know, good jawline, but I knew he didn't look like Freddie. He's, you know, he had much larger eyes, his nose wasn't the same. He was also coming straight off his show, Mr. Robot, so I knew I was going to have to use a lot of wigs, which I knew I was going to have to do anyway, because we were going from when Freddie was around about 19 up to 19, you know, 15 years later to Live Aid. I mean, I knew I needed a little bit of prosthetics. So, and obviously I knew I needed teeth. So I rang Chris Lyons first at Fangs FX to talk about getting teeth made. And then I rang Mark Coulier, who I've worked with before, to talk about getting prosthetics made. So it sort of started from there, really. I didn't want a lot of stuff. I mean, obviously we needed the teeth, and in fact he'd been practicing with a set of teeth, so I knew he was completely up for everything, which was great. But I approach things, it's kind of what's the smallest thing I can do that will have the biggest impact. And we did, you know, Mark and I talked about giving him cheek pieces, you know, because his cheekbones weren't quite as prominent as Freddie's, but we decided that for what it wasn't going to do enough for us. But most definitely we knew that he needed to change the shape of his nose, and in fact it did so much for us, because in sort of building up this section here of the nose, it helped to bring Rami's eyes closer together, because his eyes are much wider and larger than Freddie Mercury's. And also it gave us that lovely strong line. And along with, so it was really that one piece I used on him, which just worked so brilliantly. And obviously I got loads of moustaches made for the later look, and the wigs, just some beautiful wigs made by Alex Rouse, who I've worked with, and she's made my wigs for such a long time. I mean, she's so clever. Rami flew in way ahead of time to do all the casting, so we did scanning of his face and casting, and more mouth casting, and we did our very first test with him 2 weeks later. And that was great, but the wigs weren't ready then, so I mocked up some wigs. I got some ones that were already made, and you know, dressed them as close as I could to what I thought my wigs would end up looking like. And so we did our very first test then, and we must have tested at least 2 or 3 other times more, again honing in very, you know, we didn't quite get the nose right the first time, and then the second time we got it spot on, and then it was the whole process of the teeth, which we continued to do, just changing them millimetre, you know, millimetre up closer. And although I wanted them to be there, they are considerably smaller than the real Freddie Mercury teeth. Of course, the rest of the band members, they were also going to have tons of wigs. And the thing is Queen, you know, it is so easy to get any referencing on Queen. I mean, the thing about makeup, production design always starts before, so they have loads of referencing. And then costume designer will come in, and usually third in is makeup. So there's usually quite a lot of stuff around on a film. But there is documentaries, there was, you know, obviously live performances. I mean, you know, the whole band, Queen, and obviously because we were going to end it with Live Aid. In fact, Live Aid bookended the film, which was great. So much stuff, so much out there, and I just absorbed it all. I just got as much info. And of course Rami came in, and the boys came in. They had researched their own characters, as all actors do, and there'd be lots of little things. They would come and say, "Oh, did you know this, and did you know that?" And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. So, you know, there's such a lot out there. because we were doing that 15-year gap, I wanted to show the difference between when they were very fresh-faced and 19, 20, 21 to when they were 15 years older at Live Aid. So in fact I did get their faces cast, and Mark Coulier made some very fine lines on bondos, which is a material that you can, it's almost, you know, it's sticky, so you can almost just apply it direct, or you do apply it direct. And we had sort of little nose to mouth lines made, little aging bits here, little eye bags for Ben. You know, each one of them, again, studying, you know, their actor, you know, their character's face, you know, John Deakin, Brian May and Roger Taylor. And of course they were perfectly cast. I mean, you know, we did have to get the wigs right. The wigs were a thing, because those could so easily look too much. And I was particularly concerned that Gwilym, who played Brian, his wigs, you know, worked. And hopefully, I mean, I think they look great, so hopefully they did. So as I say, I mean, I was lucky. I got approached by Graham King, who was the producer on it, and I was working with him at the time, doing Tomb Raider. So normally what you would do is you'd be approached and given a script to read, and you would go for an interview along with other people. So every film you usually get, you're usually competing with other makeup and hair artists. But I was very lucky. I was asked if I would do it, and of course I said yes. You read the script, and when you're breaking the script down, you look at it, you break it down from your point of view as a makeup and hair designer. You know, if it says something like, you know, they dive into a swimming pool, they're going to be wet, you know what I mean? So you break the script down. And then I had, you know, my interview, you know, my first meetings with the director, the producers, because they already had, you know, an idea of how they, you know, the timeline was going to run for them. They already knew we were going to film Live Aid first, so that was very important. I knew I had to get that look ready, absolutely, and those would be the looks we tested first. I spent a lot of time with Julian Day, the costume designer, who had already started to make things, so I could see colours and, you know, how accurate he was going to be, which he was, to you know, performances, and also which performances we were going to do, because, you know, and in which order. Aaron, who did all the production design, he had some wonderful referencing, and his colour palette. It's really important from a hair and makeup point of view to find out what the colour palette is of the film. And you know, in the 70s there's oranges and, you know, all those colours, and you bring all that into the looks and the rust colours, and then when you go into the 80s, so it's very much a collaboration. I think initially I was excited by it. It was only later on that I was aware of how, I mean, I was a fan of Queen, but I wasn't, you know, like a massive fan. And it was only when I began to realise how huge and how much their fans really knew everything that I was absolutely aware of the responsibility, and that's when it hit me. So not quite at the first, in the beginning, but totally I was aware that I had to get it right, and I was very mindful of it. You know, the exciting part is being asked to go up for a film. The next exciting part is being offered it. And then after that you think, crumbs, I've got to do it now. So everything's exciting, but that's what's so great, is getting yourself out there and stretching yourself and hoping that you work with directors and producers and actors that want you to go further than you think you can, which I think is the best part. Well, definitely for hair and makeup. Here in Britain, we do all of it, and I definitely think that whatever course you do, that you make sure that your hair is up there along with any kind of makeup you may want to do, and the small prosthetics they teach you. And I also think it's really important to do little top-up courses, you know, go off for a barbering course. And if you are writing to a designer, do look at their body of work, because, you know, quite often we tend sometimes to get asked to do a similar type of film, and if that's not the kind of work you want to do, then maybe you should look at other designers, but most definitely look at what a designer's done and you know, write to them personally. And as I say, top up courses and pretty well say yes to everything if you can. When a set's shooting, it's very quiet, so you do have to learn not to talk, which is hard in the beginning and quite easy after a while. But I think it is, I think especially if you're a trainee, is not to be too big in the sense of personality-wise in the beginning. I mean, I think to be proactive is really important, and to watch and listen and try and be there and be helpful. And it's only as you start to do more and get more experience. But I don't think crew members should be like very visible. Because I think most of our work is done, you know, quietly, efficiently. You know, we're preparing actors for, you know, to get in front of camera, and I think it's really important, you know, to make sure they feel confident. You're giving them confidence to go in front of that camera. So I think to have a sort of quietness about you is quite nice.